This is the second video on the topic of middle age and development during middle age. We left off, we were talked about the physical health, the changes in physical health, including vision and reaction time. This lecture is going to cover some of the cognitive changes, and yeah, we'll see where it goes, right? So the big, or one of the things that we've kind of hinted at in other chapters, especially in the chapter on young adulthood, is that as we reach middle age, is our ability to think quickly on our feet begins to slow. We're not as That's what your textbook refers to as fluid intelligence. So fluid intelligence is the information processing, how we can process new stuff quite quickly. And again, that peaks in your 20s, right? That's when you're able to process new stuff quite quickly. But what becomes stronger in your midlife is what's referred to as crystallized intelligence. And if you think about crystals as being things that coalesce, they sort of set. I think of crystallized intelligence is that with a lot of life experiences and a lot of content knowledge, all these things have sort of coalesced, and maybe it's that grandmotherly wisdom or that wisdom that your mother has, and she can just say things in a very succinct way, right? So that seems to be particularly strong during this middle age. There's a couple other fancy words in here too, called selective optimization, which simply means that middle-aged people may focus their attention or use their cognitive resources and study a particular thing or be really good at one thing. And this leads to what's called expertise. And expertise is simply, you've read more books about it than anybody. You've talked about this for most of your life, longer than some people have been alive. And so you're relatively, compared to other people, you're relatively the expert, right? You've outlived and you've outread. You've just had more time on the planet. There is a stereotype, moving to the next slide, there is a stereotype about declining memory, and I think I would have probably shared this with some of you already, but the notion is that as you age, your memory is less good. And some of the current thinking says that's really not true. What is less good is our quick retrieval. That for middle-aged people, when they can't remember something, there's this overemphasizing or this dwelling, like, oh my gosh, it's because I'm getting old, my memory stinks. But when younger people don't remember anything, they don't jump to that same conclusion. So the point is that we're biased to see memory failures in middle-aged and older people, and we ignore them in younger people. And so memory, and I don't think we've talked too much about this, but it's these three stages, right? It's the acquisition, it's the encoding of information, it's the storing of information, and the retrieving of information. What is harder as you get older is that retrieving information. So last night we were watching, I don't know if you ever watch Ellen's Game of Games. It's really a silly game show, but she has this one activity where you're shown faces of celebrities and the people have to name them in 3 seconds. And my husband and I were talking, while we were watching, it was like, we could name those people if you gave me 10 seconds, right? So it's that retrieval piece that we're slow at. We know who they are, we just can't remember it in 3 seconds, and younger people can remember it in 3 seconds. Okay, so yeah, that's sort of moving on from memory, moving into retirement and learning. I don't know if you know people that are retired. Retirement is, some people really like it. Other people find it to be very difficult. When all of your friends are associated with your workplace, retirement can be very lonely. There's a couple different approaches to it, something called phased retirement, which is where I think this is one of the things that's making the shutdown difficult for some people whose identity and maybe spending, all of their time was at work, that boom, now they can't go to work and they can't go out. That's a very abrupt change. So phased retirement is sort of as you gradually withdraw. My friends in academics who do phased retirement, so they'll go from having 5 classes a semester to maybe having 3 classes a semester to maybe having 1 class a semester. So they gradually pull back from their workplace. Yeah, so what else do I need to talk about in terms of retirement? Moving on to adult personality development. What are some of the things that are happening here? All right, so Erickson's theory, right? You'll remember Erickson's theory of his crisis model. The crisis of middle age, of my age, and maybe your parents' age, is what's called generationality. It's generation. It's generations versus stagnation. And the crisis or the goal during this period is, are you leaving something behind? So middle-aged people begin to think about their quote legacy, right? What are they leaving for their children? They may look at their retirement accounts to see if they have investments that they can leave to their kids. They want to leave the farm to their kids. The shift where when you were 20, the shift was to think about how you can use your resources to create. Now the emphasis is on how you can leave what you've created behind, right? That's the goal here. How can you leave a mark? My dad died during middle age. He died at 54. And I remember him, he didn't use this language, but certainly the things that he was talking about on his deathbed were, don't forget, be sure you remember when I've left, blah, blah, blah. Here, he was very interested in leaving something of himself behind. Let's see. So we go through the seasons of life. Oh, so this is where we talk about, is this midlife a crisis or not? And why it's why it's difficult for some people. And the same way we kind of talked about, and I think we've talked about it in this class, but the same way that it's men. This, what I want to say is that the midlife crisis is more likely to be a challenge for men. And this is particularly true if their whole identity is tied up in their occupation. If their identity is tied up to their work and they retire, then who are they? If they're no longer a bank executive, or if they're no longer, my grandfather was an auto mechanic, right? If their whole identity is that, then they've lost that. Their spouse may have died, which wouldn't be that common for men, or they may have divorced them. And so this is why what we're seeing today in the United States, the highest suicide rate is middle-aged men. And that is connected to, or thought to be connected to, rates of divorce, when middle-aged men are more like, now their kids are grown and the wife moves out, retirement, and the fact that they have spent so much of their attention and so much of their energy has been dedicated to their professional development at the exclusion of social supports. So a middle-aged man gets to his retirement. He doesn't have his one intimate partner, which was his wife, and he is utterly alone, right? So for people, men and women, whose sense of self is very much tied to their physical health. Maybe they were an athlete, or their physical attractiveness, right? So you get to middle age and it's a little bit harder to look your best, or your best isn't as good as it used to be. And this can lead you to, trade in your old wife or your old husband for a new one, trade in the van for a sports car, get a facelift, all in an attempt to reclaim that feeling of youth. And that is compounded by a culture that says young is better than old, right? So our culture prefers youth. And so you see a lot. So some middle-aged people who are having a difficult time, embracing the gray, so to speak, may turn to things that are more appropriate or more common amongst younger people. And that's sort of, so as I say, this midlife transition. But this is clearly a period where we begin to go, have I wasted, the 40 years of my life? Can I make changes now? This isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, especially when your kids start to leave home. And when the kids kind of leave home, like, okay, do I need to stay in the same house? Do I need 4 bedrooms? Maybe I only need. So there's this opportunity. So we can think about this as, oh my gosh, my life is over as I knew it. Or we can think of it as, hey, this is an opportunity for me to redefine. It'll be so interesting what researchers tell us in 2 years from now, because so many things are changing right now with this whole shutdown. And there will be lots of jobs that don't come back after this, and no doubt that some of those will be held by middle-aged people. And so some of the other things to think about, we've already talked about, your health. Do you have relationships? Do you have the decisions that you regret making? Can you make different decisions? And these kinds of things. This might be a great opportunity. I'm going to stop this lecture here. And when I come back, I want to talk about one of the models of personality, and maybe some other things related to family.